he peed in the room.
Years ago, my mom told me about something that happened to her in college, and to this day it is still one of the most horrifying things I can imagine waking up to. She still uses it to remind me to always be vigilant and lock my dorm room. Cue story. When my mom attended college, she lived in a regular student dorm, and back then security was more basic than it is nowadays. She had a roommate that would often come home super late, drunk and high, and would forget to lock their dorm room. It drove my mom crazy. It's one of those nights where her roomie came home drunk and passed out, forgetting to lock their door again. My mom is fast asleep when some ninja instinct deep in her soul makes her wake up. She doesn't move, but something feels weird, like she's being watched, and she somehow senses a presence nearby. Opening her eyes, she sees the shadowy figure of a man standing at the foot of the bed, watching her, and there's something in his hand that looks like a knife. My mom sits straight up and the man dashes out of their room just as my mom starts screaming at her roommate to wake up. Terrified, they call the police, who come in and investigate to see if they can find any evidence. They discover that the man had peed in several spots around the room. There's no way to tell if this was the first time the guy broke in or if he'd done it before. After that, her roommate always remembered to lock their door, and my mom slept with a knife under her pillow. She constantly checks to make sure I'm remembering to lock my door too. I currently live in a college dorm. My mom says she's just thankful that the guy fled as soon as she woke up, rather than attacking. Too long, didn't read. Always lock your door, and thank God for my mom's ninja instincts.
Scissors.
Near 2 years ago, I had moved in with my girlfriend to a small but cheap apartment in Montreal. I had been working night shifts while in university, so most evenings she would call me before bed to talk. She mentioned she kept hearing noises in the evenings and thought it might be mice. I had never noticed the sounds but agreed it was possible, being an old building, so I set traps the next morning. However, more and more she complained about the scratching. I would even listen for it when I was home nights, but nothing. No mice. No sounds. A few weeks later, our friends down the hall asked if we could water their plants while away. One night I received a freaked out phone call from my girlfriend. She was in the neighbor's apartment and began to hear the scratching again, so she looked through the door hole and seen an old lady scratching at our door with scissors. I ran home while she called the police. It turns out the old lady had picked her and started to stalk her. She knew our schedules well enough that she was coming by only when I was at work, with her scissors each night, hoping to be let in.
They probably would have jumped us.
So this happened like 6 years ago, when I was like 18 and my dad was still alive. He drove a tractor trailer and was on the road from Sunday night until Friday night. horrible schedule and was really tough on a kid who just wanted to hang out with his dad. On Sunday nights at about 11 p.m/midnight, I would drop him off at his truck so I could use his car to get to class. I'm a big dude, so I wasn't worried about being out so late. Typically, all I would do is drive him to his truck, drop him off, and then go home and sleep. This night, it was particularly late, and he needed money from the ATM. He used Citizens Bank, but both ATMs were offline because of scheduled maintenance. I know because I called the 1-800 number. They told us they would be back online in about an hour or so me and my pops decided to just sit in the parking lot of a grocery store that had an ATM inside. The whole time we were sitting there, a group of guys, about 7 of them, had been walking around the parking lot and up and down the street. About 45 minutes after calling that 1-800 number, that group of guys slowly walked to our car. There was a car parked to our right. 4 guys stood behind our car, 1 in front of the adjacent car, and 2 at our window. 1 knocks on my window, a faint smirk on his face, and says, "Excuse me, do you know what time it is?" Me, "It's 1:30. Him, smiling, "I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can you roll your window down, man?" He could hear me. It was a big window, thin glass. I didn't say anything. I just turned my key and drove away. The guy in front of the adjacent car had shifted in front of my car, but quickly moved when he realized I had no intentions of letting him stop me. Maybe they wouldn't have jumped us, but who the hell surrounds someone's car at 1:30 to ask what time it was? They had phones.
A man followed me out of a college party.
When I was a sophomore in college, 2010, I attended a college party. A bunch of my friends and I were dancing in one of those awkward friend circles, and we noticed this weird guy kind of hanging around the outskirts of the circle. He was Hispanic, about 5'5", and I'd guess in his 30s. Because he looked so old, I didn't think he was a student. He also looked kind of dazed, maybe on drugs. As we danced, he kind of loitered around us. He touched my butt and a few of the other girls. We were annoyed, but we kind of just shifted away from him and continued dancing. He seemed to leave us alone. Seemed to. About 20 minutes later, I left the party with my friend, Advic. As we were walking down the sidewalk, we noticed about 20 to 30 feet behind us, the man was following us. He was walking really slowly, and since he was much shorter than both of us, I figured there wouldn't be a problem. Well, I was totally wrong. A few minutes later, I hear the slap, slap, slap of rushed footsteps on the sidewalk right behind me. Before I could turn around, he somehow jumped right in front of me and landed a hard punch right in the nose. He was about to beat me up more, but Advic wrestled him off me, and after a brief scuffle, he started walking away from us. By the way, I had never seen this guy before, and to my knowledge, he had never seen me. To this day, I constantly look over my shoulder and listen for footsteps when walking at night.
The Old Sanitarium.
The town I grew up in had an old sanitarium. It closed down in the late 60s, but the building was still there. In high school, everyone and their mom tried breaking in. Some succeeded, but others chickened out. After high school and a stint in the Marines, I found myself working private security, and what we mostly did was guard construction projects at night. Well, the sanitarium was slated for demo, and the company that bought the land planned on turning it into an apartment complex. So myself and a guy who had to be pushing 70, named Fred, were working one night. Fred was a former cop from Chicago, and before that was a Marine. We often swapped stories and we really enjoyed working together. The sanitarium was a hotbed for homeless and drug activity, and so we often had to chase tweakers or homeless folks off the property. That night, Fred and I were shooting the shit when he stops me and tells me someone just went over the fence. So we get out and head inside. Now it's important to note Fred was unarmed and all I had was my side piece. We also had pepper spray, a stun gun, and a baton. So we are headed after this guy who was wearing all black and wasn't responding to our commands to stop. We hear glass breaking and realize this guy must have broken into one of the old administrative offices. We have keys to the door, but the locks are old and it takes us a few minutes. Our protocol was to call dispatch to advise them of a foot chase, so Fred and I did that as I swept the rooms with my flashlight and gun. I'm calling out to this dude, and I hear an evil cackle. It sent a jolt of dread throughout my body, and Fred next to me turned white. I start pleading with this guy to show himself, telling him the company called the police, which they did not. Now the laughing is coming from behind us, and it's not one voice. It sounds like several voices. Fred literally pisses himself. He is terrified, and this is a veteran and a former cop. Fred and I turn to leave, and I hear what sounds like footsteps. Then the unmistakable sound of a gun cocking. I grab Fred and we run for it. As we do, more maniacal laughing. The cops finally do show up because dispatch couldn't reach us and called it in. They go in and find 3 guys. All 3 were armed, one with a gun, one with a homemade shiv, and the other with a lead pipe. If we hadn't run, who knows what could have happened. I have a lot more stories from my time working private security, but decided to share this first. So, tweakers who tried to lure my partner and I to being hurt, if not killed, let's definitely not meet again.
No caller ID.
This happened almost 2 years ago. It was around 2 in the morning during the summer and I was asleep. My blinds were cracked, but my room was on the second floor of the house. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating against my pillow. The moon was shining through the blinds, dimly lighting up half of my room and leaving the other half in the dark. It read, "No caller ID." I don't remember why, but I felt like I needed to answer it. Groggily, I mumbled, "Hello?" A man's voice I did not recognize replied after a solid and quiet few seconds. "Are you alone?" I couldn't think of what to say. I didn't say or do anything for what felt like minutes. I couldn't put a face or name to the voice. It was low and grumbly, and he sounded like he was moving. Finally, I said, "No," and hung up. Seconds later, I heard the doggy door downstairs open. You all know the sound, but imagine that slowed down. My dog was in my bed, now moving towards me as I had woken him up. The doggy door closed. I sat in the unsettling silence, waiting for the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. Nothing. After a few minutes, I slowly got out of my bed and made my way to my window, which overlooked the backyard. From there, I could see the back gate on the side of my house, slightly ajar. I stood and stared, unsure about what to do. I quietly went downstairs, ready to face whatever or whoever entered my house. But the back door was shut and locked. In order to get through the doggy door, the back door had to be open. This gave me some relief, but I was still unsettled that someone had tried to enter my house. To the man who tried to break in and somehow found my old number, let's not meet, and shut the damn gate on your way out.
Gas station pervert.
So I recently made my very first Reddit post here. I was thinking about it some more, and I think I have one more decently creepy story to share. This may not be as scary as some of the stories on here, but it most definitely scared the holy shit out of me. Let me start off by saying that I'm a female. Despite my username, Morning Wood was just oddly hilarious to me. And I've always looked much older for my age. I developed really early, so I've always had some catcallers and such. I've learned to live with it. But one night, my boyfriend was asleep, so I decided to have one of my friends come over. My boyfriend is extremely protective of me, and he doesn't really like me walking places alone, since our neighborhood isn't really the greatest. He's weary of me walking with my female friends as well, but he can handle it. But my friend, we'll call her Grace, came over, and we decided to walk up the street to the UDF. Lots of people might not even know what that is because I'm pretty damn sure that UDF is a mainly northern place, but it's basically a gas station / convenience store. We get there, get what we need, and then stand in the huge line of people at the register waiting to pay. There was a guy standing behind me who was obviously drunk as hell. He was giving me weird vibes, and I kept looking over my shoulder at him. Each time I did, he would smile at me. I was thinking he was probably just a nice guy, nothing to worry about. After a few more minutes, I started to notice that he had his phone out and he was taking pictures of my ass. Every time I looked at him, he'd stop and put his phone down by his side. I was starting to get nervous as hell. Grace wasn't even really paying attention. I honestly should have said something, but my anxious ass couldn't bring myself to do so. We stepped up to the register and he reached out and grabbed my butt hard and smiled at me. Maybe I'm ridiculous and overdramatic, but I started sweating like crazy and my heart was beating so fast. It scared the hell out of me because we had to walk home. I didn't know if he was going to follow us or what. We left the store, and once I was positive he wasn't behind us, I freaked and told Grace what had happened. She was livid. Why the hell didn't you tell me when it happened? I would have kicked his ass. I just wanted to get home. I felt pretty gross, quite honestly. I told my boyfriend when he woke up, and he wanted to go look for him. So, pervy UDF dude, let's not meet.
Strange times in late night public transportation.
Last week I had the strangest public transportation encounter of my life. I work at a bar, thus get off work late. Sure, I could take an Uber or cab, but those add up pretty fast, so I try to take the subway if it's before midnight. Chicago public transportation is pretty great, reliable, convenient, relatively safe. But boy, things can get real weird after 11 p.m. This is mainly due to the trains running less frequently and less fortunate individuals, often drunk, congregating for warmth. I try to time it so I don't have to wait in a tunnel with limited exits with said people. On this night, however, the train was delayed 15 minutes. I mosey over and sit on a bench by a couple of normal-looking business dudes in suits, 'cause according to my inner dialogue, they will protect me. 10 minutes or so later, this 50-something dude, clearly homeless, shuffles down the platform. When I say shuffle, I mean like no lifting of the feet, moving them ridiculously quickly, but not gaining much distance. He does all this while whispering, "Fire, fire, fire, burn, burn, burn," on repeat, and shoving handfuls of a family-sized bag of Doritos into his mouth and around his face 'cause he keeps missing. That alone was strange, but then he comes to an abrupt stop right in front of our bench and directly faces me. I could reach out and touch him, not that I would. He stands there completely still, staring at the wall above my head with one of those large creepy grins on his face for about 3 minutes, I'm trying my best to seem indifferent, headphones in and swiping things on my phone. The dudes next to me have stopped talking at this point and look at me, and I look at them with my help me eyes. One of the guys then says, "Hey man, you okay?" The homeless dude then quickly breaks his stillness and in almost robotic fashion whips his head and looks at the guy, still grinning. He then looks at me, grabs a large handful of Doritos, bops me on the head, and slowly crunches and smears the Doritos into my hair. After, he robotically turns and does his shuffle thing in the direction he came from. Both the business dudes and I sat there in utter shock of what just happened. We then awkwardly laughed, made small talk about it. I brushed the Doritos off my head. The train came 30 seconds later. Thank goodness. Still super unsettling nonetheless. So, Dorito Pyro homeless dude, let's not meet. Too long didn't read. Waiting for Subway at night and a homeless man smeared a handful of Doritos on my head.
Creep on the bus with his creep friend.
I've been reading this subreddit for a few months now and never thought I had anything to add, but I just remembered something I tried to bury away in my mind from a few years ago. To paint a picture, I'm a guy who loves having long hair, and when this happened I was not yet able to grow facial hair as well as I do now, so I was clean shaven and pretty much looked like I could be a girl due to some rather feminine features. I had just come out of university and got on the bus. There were only a few places free where nobody else was sitting, so I got to nearly the back of the bus and sat next to the window, just listening to music, minding my own business. Behind me in the back of the bus, there were two guys who looked like they might have been either homeless or did a job that made it so they had rather dirty clothing. I hadn't seen them when I came in because I tend not to look at people all that much. Social anxiety and just wanting to get home, really. They seemed to be a bit drunk, and that's kinda how the next bit came to be. About 9 minutes into the bus ride, I felt a tap on my shoulder, snapping me out of my staring out the window routine, and it was the guy sitting most towards the middle. I shall shorten him to DG for either dirty guy or drunk guy. DG, "Hey there, can you break a tenner?" Me, "Sorry, I don't have any." DG, "Whoa, that's not a voice I expected. Are you a guy or a girl?" Me, rather annoyed now, "I'm a guy and sorry I can't help you." At this point, I put my headphones back on and went back to looking out the window, because this is where any normal, albeit rude, conversation would have ended. He leaned back to his seat and had a conversation with his friend, which was becoming increasingly loud before I felt another tap on my shoulder. I sigh and take off my headphones again. Me, "Yes." DG, "So, do you have a dick?" Me, "What?" DG, Me and my friend just made a bet on if you have a dick or not. Can you take off your jeans? Me. What the fuck is wrong with you? At this point, the drunk, dirty guy had gotten up whilst his friend was encouraging him and blocked my way out of my seat. DG. Come on, just let us see. I'll share the money with you, alright? Me. Dude, leave me the fuck alone. I became aware of the fact that he was a lot taller and stronger than me, and of the fact that everyone else on the bus was trying to ignore my situation. He moved closer and put his hand on my chest and rather forcefully said, "Show me now." This reflexively caused me to shove him as hard as I could. This, due to his apparently drunken state, made him fall backwards as I quickly pushed past him. The bus had just stopped, so I got out whilst he was struggling to get to his feet. The bus pulled away and I saw him and his friend shouting and making gestures. I stood there shaking at the bus stop, waiting for the next bus for 10 minutes. Drunk, dirty guy with drunk friend. Let's not meet again. And a special thank you to the people on the bus who just acted like nothing was happening.
Never take sleeping pills on a plane.
After reading a post about a creepy encounter on a bus, I've decided to post this. I was a postgrad at the time and was traveling to London for an international workshop. I was super excited because it was my first international flight, and my super cool advisor was paying for my trip in full. It was an 11-hour flight, and I was seated between my advisor and some random guy, and because I was so excited, I couldn't sleep and decided to watch a movie. I'm super glad I did. Firstly, I have to state that my advisor, a woman, was in her early 40s and very good looking, which is not an excuse. She usually took sleeping pills while traveling so that she didn't arrive tired and stressed. As usual, she popped the pills early on, so an hour into our flight she was dead to the world and there was absolutely no way to wake her up. This day she was wearing a tank top, which was not particularly revealing, but a small bit of cleavage was visible. Right after she fell asleep, I noticed the guy next to me was staring at her cleavage. As I stated, she was pretty good looking, so a lot of people often glance her way. He noticed that I had seen him and glanced away, and I thought that was it. I started to watch a movie, but a few minutes later I caught him staring again. And not just a quick look, he was staring almost unblinkingly at her. I cleared my throat and he looked away again. Moments later, he was staring again. This time I turned to him and gave him the death stare. He kinda grinned and then turned around, and I thought he had gone to sleep. An hour later, I was starting to nod off when I woke up with a start to see the guy reaching across me. He wasn't touching her yet, but it was pretty obvious he intended to. I immediately slapped his hand and asked him what the hell he was doing. He didn't answer, and I assumed he didn't speak English. He was reading a French paper earlier. At that point, I was creeped out and couldn't sleep anyway. Despite the fact that I was super awake, the guy still tried to cop a feel 2 more times. The last time I grabbed his hand and twisted one of his fingers hard enough to get him to wince. Throughout, he continued to stare unblinkingly at her, and I had had enough. So eventually I ended up sitting with my whole body turned to him, glaring at him for the remaining 6 hours of the flight. Most of the time he continued to try and catch a glimpse of her, and when he saw me staring at him, would turn and look at the front again. Needless to say, it was the most uncomfortable flight I've ever been on. But luckily, after we landed, he disappeared into the crowd, never to be seen again. Edit. I did report the guy afterwards to security, but never got an update from the people I reported him to, so I have no idea what happened to him. It was an overnight flight, and after the lights were turned off, there were no flight attendants coming round. I would have reported him on the spot if they were close by. I didn't get up to fetch one because I didn't want to leave him alone with her. Plus, I'm a woman and would have had to literally climb over him to go get one. He never showed any interest in me. Lucky me. And he acted all normal after the lights came back on before we landed. Also, I did tell my advisor about the guy after I finally got her awake.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Hello. This is my first time posting. This is my favorite sub, so I wanted to contribute. This story took place at a train station in a busy city in Asia. The train station is always crowded, as it is one of the few that connects to the underground trains. In the morning, it is outrageously packed with office workers rushing to get to their desks on time, including me. I was 25 years old at the time. Nothing out of the ordinary happened that day. I failed to wake up early, got stuck in the rush hour, and had to push through throngs of people to get to the fare gate. "Excuse me," a male voice said from behind me. I didn't pay attention. Every fiber of my being was focused on getting through the fare gate and making sure no one tried to cut in front of me. "Excuse me," the voice said again, louder. "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me." Okay, that dude's voice was practically in my ear now. I turned to see who the annoying guy was. A man in formal work attire stood facing me, a little too close, but I guess that couldn't be helped since it was crowded. Maybe he saw me drop something by accident. "Can you tell me how to get to EERIE?" I remember giving him a weird look at first, because all he had to do was look at the station's map. One of the train stations was literally called EERIE. This is not like Europe, where there are so many different train routes that the map looks confusing. We only have 2 routes that intersects at one station. I'm used to being asked for directions by strangers, though, so I smiled kindly and told him to go to EERIE station. When he continued to just stand there and stare at me, I pointed to the ticket booth behind him and told him to ask the staff there if he needed more details. Having done my good deed for the day, I went on my way and forgot about the whole incident. A couple of months went by, and as I waited to get through the fare gate in the morning as per usual, it happened again. "Excuse me," a male voice said from behind. "Excuse me, excuse me." This time I wasn't engrossed in my thoughts and turned towards the voice by instinct. "Can you tell me how to get to EERIE?" I froze. A man in a formal office attire. I looked up into his face. He looked me straight in the eyes as he waited for my answer. I honestly couldn't tell if this was the same guy. I couldn't remember his face. I remembered he was plain looking, but that was it. Alarm bells went off in my head. Normal, intelligent people simply don't go about asking a dumb question like that all the time. I was sure it was the same guy. Maybe this was his pathetic attempt at talking to a girl. Since I didn't remember his face, maybe he also forgot my face and didn't realize he used the same line with me already. He was probably using this line on all the girls that are his type or looked similar to me. In any case, I was obviously wasting my time giving him a proper answer, so I said, "Ask the ticket office," and quickly walked away. I forgot about him completely again. Then a few months passed. The third time it happened, I simply walked away without saying anything. More months passed. The fourth time was when I finally remembered the man's stupid face and already knew what he was going to ask when I heard the word, "Excuse me," from behind. By this time, I made it a habit to ignore all "excuse me's" that were spoken to me from behind. "Excuse me," a voice said next to my ear. I ignored it, quite expertly now, I might add. I was deaf to anyone needing help from behind me. "Excuse me," the voice said again. Oh shit. Whenever there was more than one "excuse me," I knew it was the guy. I walked away faster, but before I could even think I was out of the clear, he tapped me on the shoulder. That triggered me. It was not okay to touch me. What the fuck? I rounded on him. "No, I don't know where EERIE is," I said. To my surprise and confusion, it was a different guy this time. He was lanky and everything about him looked too angular. "Can I be your friend?" he asked. The way he said "friend" made it clear what kind of friend he meant, and that seemed to break my stupor. "Are you fucking kidding me?" I glared at the guy. I got stopped in my rush hour for this shit? Fucking weirdo. I had no time for this. Until this day, I still don't know what that was all about. I'm quite average looking, and my figure is considered thick by Asian girls' standards, as I'm not the thin and delicate type. I ran into the first weirdo a couple more times after this, but then it all stopped for about a year. I almost forgot about it and finally stopped jumping every time I heard "excuse me" from behind. In fact, I had relaxed so completely that today when I heard a voice say, "Excuse me," I didn't think anything of it. It said, "Excuse me," again. Yup, still relaxed, but still kept walking towards the train station. Excuse me, excuse me. I guess that guy is in a hurry. Better get out of his way. I moved to one side of the sidewalk to let the dude pass. Excuse me. A man in formal office attire ran up from behind me and cut me off. Yup, he's back. Edit. The last encounter with the "excuse me, how do I get to Ekamai" man made it the 7th time. Everyone in the story is local, so no foreigner element here. Thank you everyone for your ideas and support.
Follow your gut. Don't stop the car.
This is my first time posting, so here goes nothing. So this happened about 10 years ago when I was a freshman in college and I had just started dating my boyfriend. He lived a few towns away from me at the time. We actually now live in a cute apartment not far from where this story takes place. And I was taking some of the back roads towards the parkway to get home. I had fallen asleep at his house while watching a movie, so it was about 3 a.m. and I was exhausted. I knew the way to the parkway well enough, but I was still not familiar with that particular part of town. As you get closer to the parkway, you have to actually cut through a park to get to the entrance ramp. That being said, there were very few lights and the nearest house wasn't far, but it was totally out of sight. I pull onto the short road and see a gold sedan stopped in the middle of the road. It was actually stopped in a way that it didn't matter which way you were traveling. It was going to be a squeeze to get around him. Just for a little background, I'm very small, and at the time I might have weighed 100 pounds, and I only stand at 5 feet tall. So I slow my car down and I'm trying to see if I can see headlights coming from the other direction so I can pull around him. But before I could make a move, this tall man runs around from the front of this stopped car and starts waving his arms to get my attention. As I mentioned, I'm small, young, alone, and it's 3 a.m. There was no way I was going to stop for this guy. He didn't look worried. He didn't even look that scary, but an alarm went off in my head that something wasn't right. I tried to inch up so that I could pass him, but he stands in front of my car and is not going to let me pass. I quickly lock my car doors, which became a habit after this. and stopped. He starts trying to talk to me, and he's now making his way over to my window. My hearing isn't very good, but he was so close to me that I could read his lips, and he was asking me for help. He wanted my cell phone to call someone. I said that I was very sorry, but no. He had his hand on my window. Please. I said no again and didn't care if I ran over his foot. I just left. I was starting to get scared. I was able to just barely pass, but had to do so on the oncoming traffic lane. I look in my mirror and he's just standing in the middle of the road, staring at me. I could see the anger on his face in my brake lights. I pull back into the right lane, and as I did, my headlights catch 3 men climbing out of the bushes. They were all dressed in the same black t-shirts and jeans, and they were all glaring at me. I could almost feel the anger radiating off of them. I gunned it and flew up the road and onto the parkway. I could feel my whole body shaking. What had just happened? What were they going to do if I had stopped? I pulled out my phone and called the police. They had to transfer me a few times because no one could figure out if I should be talking to the county police or highway patrol. It was basically at the parkway entrance and no one wanted to deal with me. When I was finally able to tell someone what had happened, they sent a car over to check it out. I had asked the officer to call me back and let me know if they found them, since I drive over there a lot. He later told me that by the time they got there, the men and car were gone. But not even 5 minutes after they spoke to me, another woman called in, had the same stories as me, in that same location. I was advised not to drive over by the park at night anymore. I had no idea that it was not safe at the time, and have never taken that exit at night since. When I told my parents, my mom cried and my dad was crazy angry, but they were both proud of me for not stopping. There was also a new rule instituted in our family, boyfriend included, that we had to text someone when we were on our way home. So, scary guys at the park, let's not meet.
The day I almost got kidnapped.
I've seen a lot of your stories that creeped me out and thought it was time to share mine. This happened when I was about 11. I was hanging out with a friend and she had to go home, so I walked back with her. It was the middle of the day. I live in a small town, so it's never crowded or busy. No one in sight, except that guy in his car from across the street. He was parked in a parking lot, so I thought he was waiting for someone. My friend left and I started walking home. Instantly, he started to follow me. I was almost sure this was not a coincidence. I crossed the street. He kept going in my direction. Still, no one in sight, and I started being scared. He was driving very slowly, too slowly for it to be normal. To test if he was actually following me, I stopped and pretended I had to check my shoes. He stopped as well. I was terrified. Luckily, I knew the city perfectly. I was born here. I knew that the next right turn is a way he can't take with a car. I immediately turned there and he just rushed to the next road where he could turn right. As soon as I saw him turn on the next road, I went back on my steps and just ran as fast as I could until I reached my home. Only a couple minutes later, I realized I could have so easily been kidnapped there, with no witnesses at all. To the weird man in his car, let's not meet.
Wake up.
Alright, so I'm new to this sub. Just found out about it today, actually, and I've decided to share an experience of mine. So, some background information. I'm male, 24, from Pretoria, South Africa. This occurred about 8-ish years ago. So the area that I live in is generally okay, but it's had its fair share of crime, creeps, and the general other stuff. My house is one house away from this really large park, really lackluster, only a tall slide and a pair of swings. The rest is open field. So I was walking to the local spar, and in order to get there, I had to cross said park. Now I was used to seeing shoes and other things lying randomly around, but this time was different. I found 3 whole pairs of clothes just lying there. Looked like Cell had gone through the place. This kind of rattled me, being 15 at the time. I had decided to hurry past this area as I was getting bad vibes from it when I felt someone grab my arm. Shocked, I whipped around to face a man, really tall, staring me right in the face with this angry expression. I wasn't really intimidated, as I'm quite heftily built, but given the circumstances, my heart did start beating a little quicker. This guy starts ranting on to me about a whole bunch of nonsense, and trying not to piss him off, I just agree to everything he says. I can remember the smell of drunk on his breath. One sentence that stood out was about how he was Moses reincarnate, and I should play with myself tonight. Okay, I thought, this is starting to get creepy. I decided I'd had enough and thanked the man for the advice before turning to walk away, not running because I didn't want to trigger whatever predatory instinct this man had. So I'm about 50 meters away from him when he starts running towards me, tackling me down, starts screaming in my ear, "Wake up, wake up!" Scratching my arm with these long nails I'd failed to notice, and attempted to bite my throat before breaking down in tears about how I killed him. I'm practically dying of fear and the overall oddity of the situation when some people see what's going on and rush over to get the man off me. He doesn't even put up a fight, just lies there crying until the police came to pick him up. Not sure what happened to him, or why those clothes were there, or what could have happened to me, but all I'm saying is, let's not meet again, sir.
Are you disabled?
So I was walking home from school one day when I heard a voice say, "Hey, you want a job?" I turned and saw a slightly shabby looking man in his mid-40s, about 7 feet to my right, in front of what I assumed to be a vacant home. Now, given that I wasn't an absolute idiot, I was very suspicious. I knew I wouldn't get any closer to the man, but I was a bit curious about what he was going to say, for whatever reason. In a moment of pure inquisitive genius, I nervously asked, "Huh?" To which he again stated that he was willing to pay me to help him with something. I stared at him, probably looking confused and mildly unnerved. He then said, "I just need you to move some dirt to this warehouse." Now it was at this point I realized I really needed to get away from this person, as I am 5'3" and would probably not win a fight with this guy. I then said in another moment of pure genius, "I can't work. I'm 14. To which he responded, "Are you disabled?" Which quite frankly really caught me off guard. "No," I said. "Then you can help me with this dirt." He was starting to get mad, so I just said, "I have to get home," and walked way faster than usual to my house, constantly looking behind me. So, creepy guy who wanted me to carry dirt to a warehouse hidden from public view. Let's not meet again. Edit. It just occurred to me that I should mention that this area was well within walking distance of an elementary, middle, and the small charter high school I attended that he may not have known about. The creep probably thought I was a middle schooler. Edit 2. For any people looking at the comments, there was originally a bit in the story where I talked about how the fact that I was not conventionally attractive made me think he wouldn't sexually assault me. Many people voiced disagreement with this notion, and I eventually decided after way too long to take that out, as to further the idea that only conventionally attractive people get raped was something that I deeply regret and did absolutely not intend to do.
Can you help me find my puppy?
My boyfriend and I love listening to scary stories on YouTube. We talk about how creepy the stories are and what it would be like if something like that happened to us. One day, while we are cleaning the house and listening to YouTube, there was a story about a little kid that was followed by some man in a van. After the story finishes, he casually mentions, "Some guy tried to get me into a van once." What? I laugh. He must be joking. No, really. When I was little. Oh my god. What? You're lying. Tell me. He starts off, "Yeah, when I was little, you know how I loved riding my bike. I had my white bike, and my hair was still blonde, so I must have been about 7. That summer was the first time my mom would let me ride on the street to ride around the block. I was just allowed down to the end of the street. I was riding my bike, and when I got down to the end of the road, a guy with an actual pedo stash in a van stops in the road. He was headed in the opposite direction, so the driver door was closest to me. He sort of leans out the window and calls out to me, "Hey kid, have you seen my puppy?" I told him no. So he asks, "Can you come help me look for him?" All I remember is not caring about this guy's dog because my dog was safe at home. I gave the guy my best tough face and pedaled like I'm trying to win the Tour de France all the way home. Once I was inside, I looked out the window and saw the van slowly driving by. "What did your mom say?" I didn't tell her. "What? Are you crazy?" "Yeah, I didn't want to go back to riding my bike around the pool in the backyard." "Were you afraid?" "Not really. We had an assembly, so I knew what to do." He is completely unfazed by this incident. He thinks his 7-year-old self was a funny pseudo badass. I can't imagine if this happened to me. I would have probably been taken because I will literally do anything if a dog is involved. And to the creepy stash van man, can't you come up with a new line? Edit. I was reminded of this story tonight and decided to post it, but now my boyfriend and I are trying to figure out if the guy was caught or if other boys went missing in the area at the time. He lived right outside of Philadelphia in Burlington County, New Jersey. He is 24 now, so this happened in the early 2000s. So if Reddit wants to play detective, I would love to see that.
Phone calls from a breather.
About 15 years ago, I worked as a part-time receptionist at a car dealership. I worked Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 5 to 9 p.m. and Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. It was a pretty sweet gig, actually. My mom worked in the back office and was pretty well universally liked, so I was cool by association. I was in school at the time, so I had ample time to do homework or do other hobbies because I was only expected to answer the phones, give out basic information, and route calls as needed. A few times, I had to deal with people who were angry that we advertised "Hablamos Español" because we had a Spanish-speaking saleswoman. I was even in one of their commercials once as a customer because the actor didn't show up. About 6 months or so into the job, I started getting a call every Saturday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The first time, I picked up the phone, delivered my greeting, and then nothing, just breathing. Hello? Breathing. Do you need help? Breathing. If you need help, press a button twice. Breathing. I'm going to hang up now. Breathing. I hung up. They didn't call back. The next Saturday, same thing. And the one after that, and after that. I told my mom about it, and she said it was probably just one of the sales guys playing a prank. Car salesmen are a breed unto themselves, and I wouldn't have put it past them. But I didn't think this was the case. This went on for the rest of my employment there, about a year or so more. Sometimes I wouldn't get a call at all and wonder why. Sometimes it came later in the day. It was always just breathing, no background sounds, no speaking, no button presses. I began referring to the person calling as the breather. I don't recall ever feeling watched or followed. The general manager had one of the sales guys escort me to my car at the end of the shift anyway. At one point, my then fiance worked in the service drive and he escorted me. It was never reported to the police or anything, and as far as I know, the person who took over after me never got those calls. My mom continued working there after I left, and she asked the new receptionist. I don't live anywhere close to that area anymore, and I've never been the object of obsession for a stalker that I know of. I still wonder who it was and why they kept calling.
She looks like a little Aryan.
So, this happened to me when I was 4 or 5, and well, 5-year-olds don't have the best memory, but this really stuck with me. Not sure if this would go better in creepy encounters, but whatever. To start off, I was a cute child, like really cute. Long sandy blonde hair, blue eyes, and pale skin. My dad decided to put me into modeling and I did a couple local ads in magazines, etc. Aside from being in local ads, just being a cute kid got my parents into more than a few confrontations with weirdos who went a bit too far with their compliments. This dude stuck with me though. One day, my mother took me out to breakfast to celebrate my birthday, and as we were sitting waiting for our breakfast, a man came up to us. I don't quite remember what he looked like, and I'm not gonna make something up, but he definitely made me uncomfortable even as a little kid who was overly friendly. He started talking to my mom, complimenting my outfit and asking if I had any upcoming gigs. My mom was never in the mood for conversation with strangers. My dad was the show-off parent for sure, but she was polite, I remember. That was until the guy got weird. Then he said something I didn't understand at the time. Wow. She really looks just like a little Aryan. That's when my mom was done and asked the man to leave. He didn't, and proceeded to reach out and stroke my hair. I just sat there and stared at my mom in an uncomfortable stupor. My mom flipped her shit and stood up, grabbing me by the arm and pulling me out to the car. While she was putting her purse in the back and fixing my car seat, I was standing next to her looking back at the restaurant. The man from inside was standing out front, waving at me with a creepy ass grin on his face. I remember having nightmares about it for weeks, and my mom won't talk about it to this day. Not long after, she made my dad pull me from modeling. I'm kind of grateful for that, though, now. So, creepy Nazi guy, let's not meet ever again.
The body dump.
I have posted this on a couple of Ask Reddit threads that both died off with little interest. I thought I would post it here, seeing as it may be a better fit. Okay, so several years ago now, back in April of 2009, if I recall correctly, I had just gotten through winter quarter the first time I went to college and was taking some advantage of spring break. I, along with 3 friends, decided to get outdoors as it was the first truly nice day of the year. So, I live in Western Washington, and there is a stretch of road that hugs the edge of Bellingham Bay and Samish Bay, north of Puget Sound. It is called Chuckanut Drive, and it's a cool stretch of road to drive, as it hugs a cliff face for a while and overlooks the water. Along the way, there are a number of turnoffs to get a picture and other touristy stuff. Anyway, my friends and I drove up there and pulled into one such turnoff with the intention of hiking down to the water and enjoying some lunch, beer, and weed, and just enjoy the day. Now, the trail we took bottomed out next to a set of train tracks that hugged the coastline like the highway above it. This is a relevant detail here, as many transients and other assorted weirdos traveled its lengths quite often. In fact, we sat on some driftwood on the other side of the tracks next to the bay and watched several go by as we hung out. No one bothered us, and we didn't bother them, but half of them were not completely dressed, and things like blankets and even tarps were a common sight to see draped over them. We were there maybe an hour or so before realizing that the place was actually way more boring than we thought it would be, and decided to head out and find something else to do. So, as we are leaving, we spotted what looked like a far better path back up than the one we came down on, and chose it instead. And this is where our day took a bit of a turn. Not long after we started hiking up this new trail, we all saw what was obviously a blanket or something wrapped around something else. It was easy enough to see that it was covering something big and solid, but not as big as a full-grown human. But we instantly knew it was a body. To this day, I can clearly recall how I kept chanting in my head, "Don't be a child, don't be a child, don't be a child," etc. Walking up to it, we saw that it was not a dead kid, which I am grateful for to this day, but was sadly a dead dog. Its head was missing, having been cut clean off at some point just above the collar, which it was still wearing. There was absolutely no blood, and the blanket was still very clean, as though it had just been pulled from the linen closet moments prior. There was no smell from the body either, so I guess it hadn't been there very long. Furthermore, branches and shrubbery had been cut or pulled free and set up in a way to attempt to hide the body from the tracks, which were maybe 10 to 15 feet away from our location. It was obviously a body dump. Someone had murdered this poor dog and dumped the body by the railroad tracks, and they had done it very recently. At this point, we looked at each other and decided to nope the fuck out of there and raced up the steep trail back to the road. We reached my buddy's blazer and burned rubber out of that place as quickly as we could. We later called the sheriff's office about this, but I think they just assumed that a stray dog got hit by a passing train when we mentioned that its head was missing. We never heard back from them about anything, so I have to assume they either didn't find it or didn't look. Regardless, I haven't gone down that stretch of road since. Too long, didn't read. Hiked down a cliff and found the dumped, headless remains of someone's pet dog. Hiked back out.